Some storms don't announce themselves. They build in silence, in the spaces between two people who used to know each other perfectly, in the cold distance that grows between a husband's back and a wife's sleepless eyes. Damien Calloway drove his wife into the rain with nothing but a suitcase and a lie he believed was the truth. He was the most feared man on the East Coast. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that she was carrying his child when she walked out that door. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one doesn't end the way you think it does. The rain came in sideways that night, the kind that didn't fall so much as a tack. Horizontal sheets of water driven by a wind that had been building offshore for 3 days before finally making landfall against the Connecticut coastline. It hammered the glass of the Calloway estate with the persistence of something angry, something that had been waiting a long time to say what it had to say. The mansion sat on 4 acres of manicured grounds behind a 12-foot iron gate, flood-lit and enormous, the kind of property that made people slow their cars down on the highway just to stare. From the outside, it looked like the home of someone who had everything. Inside, a marriage was ending. Damien Calloway stood at the center of his study with his jacket still on and his tie loosened by exactly 1 knot, the kind of dishevelment that passed for losing control in a man like him. He was 41 years old, built across the shoulders like someone who had spent his 20s doing things no one was meant to survive, with a jaw that hadn't softened in middle age and dark eyes that had learned to reveal nothing. The study was all dark walnut and low lighting, the kind of room designed to communicate authority without saying a word. 3 of his most trusted lieutenants stood against the far wall. Nobody was sitting down. On the desk between Damien and the door lay a single manila folder. Inside it, photographs, financial transfer records, a disposable phone registered to a name that didn't exist, recovered from an address 3 blocks from the Marchetti family's primary operation in South Providence. Call logs, timestamps, a handwritten note, her handwriting, or something close enough to it that 2 separate analysts had confirmed it independently. Charlotte Hayes Calloway had been feeding information to the Marchetti family for at least 4 months. That was what the folder said. That was what Logan Mercer had told him 2 hours ago, sliding the folder across the desk with the quiet gravity of a man performing the most painful duty of his life. Logan was his underboss, the man who had stood at Damien's right hand for 11 years. If Logan brought him something, it was real. That was the unspoken contract between them, built in blood and verified over more than a decade of shared survival. "She's been talking to them since March," Logan had said. "Small things first, route schedules, meeting frequencies. Nothing that would burn us immediately, but enough to let them anticipate. The attempt on your life last Tuesday. The driver that knew to take Whitmore instead of the highway." "Don't," Damien had said. Logan had gone quiet. The assassination attempt had been 4 days ago. A black SUV with stolen plates had cut off Damien's convoy on Whitmore Avenue, which was not a route his drivers were supposed to use. 3 of his men were still in the hospital. His head of security, a former Army Ranger named Bates, had taken a round through the shoulder that had missed his subclavian artery by less than an inch. Damien himself had walked away without a scratch, which was either luck or providence, or the universe making some kind of cruel point about the difference between the men who gave orders and the men who carried them out. He had spent 4 days trying to understand how anyone had known to be on Whitmore Avenue. Now he was standing in his study staring at a folder that told him the answer had been sleeping in his bed. Charlotte was in the East Wing. He'd had her escorted there an hour ago under the pretense of a security briefing. A precaution, he'd told the man who walked her up, just routine protocol after the incident. She didn't know yet what was in the folder. She didn't know what was coming. Damien had spent 58 minutes standing at his desk rehearsing what he was going to say, and in 58 minutes he had not landed on a single version of it that felt anything other than catastrophic. He told his men to leave. They filed out without a word. Logan paused at the door and looked back, and Damien held his gaze for 3 seconds before looking away, which was his version of saying he didn't need anyone to hold his hand. The door clicked shut. The rain pressed against the windows. Damien picked up the folder, held it for a moment, then put it back down. He walked to the east wing. The hallway between the main house and the east wing was 60 feet of wide corridor lined with architectural photographs. Charlotte's work, prints she'd framed herself during the first year of their marriage, when she still hung things on walls and talked about which spaces made her feel most alive. She'd had a theory about light, something about the way certain angles of natural illumination could make a person feel held rather than merely sheltered. He'd listened to her explain it twice over dinner and hadn't fully understood it either time, but had watched her face while she talked and understood something more important, that she was the kind of person who thought about how spaces made other people feel, and that he was not. He didn't look at the photographs as he walked past them. She was sitting on the window seat at the far end of the east wing sitting room, her knees drawn up, watching the storm. She was wearing a gray sweater that was too large for her, one of his from years ago, the kind of thing that accumulated in a marriage the way furniture did, neither of ours nor yours anymore. Just here. Her dark hair was loose and slightly damp, like she'd showered recently, and her feet were bare. She looked, in that moment, achingly ordinary. Not like a woman who would betray anyone. Not like a woman capable of the thing the folder described. He had loved her for 6 years and been married to her for 3, and the distance between those two facts had never felt larger than it did right now. She heard him enter and turned. She had brown eyes that could shift registers quickly, from warm to sharp to exhausted and back again without warning. And right now they were doing the exhausted version, the kind of tired that had nothing to do with sleep. "You told Marcus I needed to stay in this wing," she said. Not angry, just noting it. "Like I'm a guest." "Charlotte." She looked at him more carefully then. She'd always been able to read the barometric pressure of his moods, even when he was trying not to broadcast them, which he was always trying not to do. Whatever she read in him now made her uncurl slightly from the window seat and set both feet on the floor. "What happened?" she said. He crossed the room and set the folder on the low table in front of her. She looked at it, then at him. Then she opened it. He watched her face as she went through it. Her expression didn't collapse the way people's did in movies. No gasp, no hands flying to cover her mouth. What happened instead was a very slow kind of stillness, the way a pond goes still after something has disturbed it from below. She turned each page carefully. She looked at the photographs. She read the call logs. She looked at the handwritten note for a long time, long enough that Damien felt the back of his neck go tight. "This isn't mine," she finally said. Her voice was level, carefully level. The tone of someone who knows that losing composure right now will cost them something. "The handwriting analysis. I don't care what the analysis says, Damien. This isn't mine." She looked up at him. "I have never spoken to anyone in the Marchetti organization. I don't know any of their people. I don't know their addresses or their schedules or whatever else is in here." She tapped the folder. "This is fabricated." "By who?" "I don't know by who. By whoever wants you to be standing in front of me right now looking at me like this." "Like what?" She held his gaze. "Like you've already made up your mind." The rain was very loud. Damien became aware of his own breathing, slower and heavier than it should have been, the way his body always responded to situations his mind was trying to control. He had not slept in 4 days. 3 of his men were in the hospital. Someone had known he would be on Whitmore Avenue. The folder was thorough and detailed and corroborated by 2 independent analysts and his own underboss, a man he trusted with his life. And Charlotte was sitting in front of him telling him it was fabricated. And she was not crying, and she was not begging, and she was looking at him with the specific exhaustion of a woman who has spent too long trying to be seen by someone who keeps choosing not to look. "The note is your handwriting," he said. "I'm telling you it isn't." "Charlotte, I'm telling you it isn't." Her voice fractured on the last word, not breaking, just showing a seam. She pressed her lips together and looked down at the folder and then back up at him. "Do you hear me? I am telling you that I did not write that note, that I have never spoken to the Marchetti family, and that someone in your organization is lying to you. That is what I'm telling you. And I need you to decide right now whether you believe me or whether you believe a piece of paper." The decision was the thing he would spend the rest of his life excavating, turning over in his hands in dark hotel rooms, and in the front seats of cars parked outside hospitals, and in the silent kitchen of a house that had once been full of someone else's warmth. Later, he would not be able to say exactly what made him choose wrong. Whether it was the 4 days without sleep, whether it was the image of Bates bleeding on the concrete of Whitmore Avenue. Whether it was the fact that loving someone had always felt, to Damien Calloway, like a liability he'd never fully made peace with, and that some cold and defensive part of him had been waiting for a reason to prove it. Whatever the reason, he looked at his wife's face and chose the folder. "I need you to leave," he said. Something happened in her eyes then. Not surprise. That was the part that would haunt him later. Not surprise. Like some part of her had been waiting for this too, had seen it coming from a very long way away, and had spent months bracing for the impact. She blinked once, slowly. Then she stood up. "Okay," she said. Just that. "Okay." She walked past him toward the hallway, and he turned to watch her go, and she stopped at the doorway without turning around. "Damien," he waited. "I hope whatever you find on the other side of this is worth it." She paused. "I really do." Then she was gone down the hallway, and Damien stood in the East Wing sitting room with the folder on the table and the rain hammering the windows. And he did not move for a long time. It took Charlotte 40 minutes to pack. He knew because he tracked it in the sounds the house made, drawers opening and closing, the particular percussion of a suitcase being pulled from a high shelf, the brief silence of someone standing in a room and deciding what to leave behind. The sounds moved methodically through the upper level of the East Wing and then went quiet, and then he heard the main staircase, and then the front hall, and then the front door opened. He did not go to the door. He stood at the window of his study and watched the driveway below, where the estate's exterior lights turned the rain into silver curtain, and he watched Charlotte Hayes Calloway walk out of his house in the middle of a storm with a single suitcase in her hand and no one beside her. She was wearing a dark coat over the gray sweater, and she'd put shoes on, and she walked to the black car idling at the far edge of the drive, the town car he'd had Marcus arrange for her, because even in this, he was still making arrangements, still managing logistics, still performing the mechanics of care while withholding the substance of it. The car door closed. The taillights moved down the drive and disappeared through the gate. Damien stood at the window and watched the empty driveway for a long time, and the rain kept coming, and nothing in the house made a sound. He poured 3 fingers of bourbon and did not drink it. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop and did not look at the screen. He walked back to the East Wing at some point after midnight. He wasn't sure of the exact time because he'd stopped checking, and stood in the doorway of the bedroom Charlotte had used tonight before the conversation that had ended their marriage. The room smelled faintly of her. The window seat where she'd been sitting still held the slight impression of where her weight had been. The folder was still on the low table where he'd left it. He should go to bed. He knew he should go to bed. He crossed the room instead and began straightening, the kind of mindless physical activity his body reached for when his mind refused to cooperate. He picked up a water glass from the nightstand. He straightened the window seat cushion. He crouched down to retrieve a small throw pillow that had fallen beneath the bed frame, and when he reached under there, his hand closed around something else, something that had slid against the baseboard, tucked behind the pillow's shadow. An envelope. Plain white, letter size, unsealed, slightly crumpled at one corner like it had been handled nervously. He turned it over. No name on it. No address. Just an envelope that had been sitting under this bed, which meant it had been with Charlotte's things, which meant she had dropped it or left it without knowing. He opened it. Inside were 2 things. The first was a thin pink and white stick, the kind sold at every pharmacy in America, with a small plastic window near one end. In that window, 2 distinct blue lines. The second was a small appointment card, the letterhead of an OB/GYN practice in New Haven. A date marked 3 weeks from now, an appointment time, and a printed note in the bottom corner in small type. First trimester ultrasound. Approximately 10 weeks. Damien Calloway, the most feared man on the East Coast, knelt on the floor of an empty bedroom in his enormous house in the middle of a Connecticut rainstorm, and he held a positive pregnancy test in both hands, and the world he had believed himself to be in charge of ceased to exist. 10 weeks. She had been 10 weeks pregnant tonight. She had stood in front of him and told him the folder was fabricated. She had told him calmly, without flinching, while carrying his child inside her body, and he had looked at her face and chosen the folder. The bourbon downstairs was still sitting untouched on his desk. The rain was still coming. 3 of his men were still in the hospital, and the mother of his unborn child was somewhere on a highway in the middle of a storm, in a car arranged by the man who had just destroyed her marriage, moving further away from him with every passing minute. He did not know where she was going. He did not know if she would answer her phone. He did not know yet what he had actually done tonight, the full shape of it, the total consequence. That understanding would come later, in pieces, over days, each piece arriving with the particular cruelty of a truth that refuses to be absorbed all at once. What he knew right now was this. He was holding a pregnancy test that his wife had left behind when he forced her out into the rain. And for the first time in his adult life, Damian Calloway did not know what to do next. He was still kneeling on the floor when his phone rang. It was Logan. He let it ring. It rang again. He let that one go too. The third time he silenced it and set it face down on the floor beside him, and he stayed where he was for a long time, the test in his hands, the rain against the windows, the house breathing its enormous empty silence around him. Somewhere out there beyond the gate and the highway and the storm, Charlotte was gone. And the only evidence that she had ever been here, the only thing she had left behind without meaning to, was the proof of everything he was about to lose. He didn't sleep. That wasn't unusual for Damian Calloway. Sleep had always been something he negotiated with rather than surrendered to, a tactical withdrawal he permitted himself in controlled increments rather than a genuine loss of consciousness. But the sleeplessness of this particular night was a different animal entirely. It had teeth. It sat in the corner of the room and watched him with the patient, unblinking attention of something that knew it had already won. He stayed on the floor of the East Wing bedroom until sometime around 3 in the morning, when the cold of the hardwood finally worked its way through his trousers and reminded him that he had a body and the body had needs, and the body did not care about the catastrophe his mind was currently processing. He got up slowly, the way a man gets up when he's been still too long and his joints have opinions about it. He set the pregnancy test and the appointment card back inside the envelope with a care that bordered on reverence, folded the flap down, and carried it to his study. He put it in the center drawer of his desk. Then he sat in his chair and stared at the drawer for a while. At 4:15, he picked up his phone and called Charlotte's number. It rang 7 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was the version of her voice she used for professional calls, measured, clear, a fraction warmer than strictly necessary. The voice of someone who understood that how you sounded on the phone was a kind of architecture too. He listened to the whole thing and didn't leave a message and called back immediately. This time it went straight to voicemail, which meant she'd declined the call manually, which meant she was awake, which meant she was somewhere with her phone in her hand actively choosing not to talk to him. He couldn't argue with that. By 6 in the morning, he had made 4 decisions. The first was that he needed to know where she was, not to drag her back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But because the idea of her being somewhere unknown in the state she must currently be in, pregnant and alone in the aftermath of what he'd done, was producing a particular kind of dread he had no established framework for managing. The second decision was that Logan Mercer needed to be in his office by 7. The third was that Richard Holloway, his political advisor and the man who had introduced several of the secondary sources in that folder, would be in the building by 8. The fourth decision was that he would not, under any circumstances, let either of them know what he'd found in the East Wing bedroom until he understood what he was actually dealing with. He showered, changed, and went downstairs. Marcus Trent, his head of household security, was already in the kitchen with coffee going. Marcus was 62 years old, former state police, built like a fireplace, and had the rare quality of being able to exist in a room without making it feel occupied. He had worked for the Calloway household for 9 years, which meant he had watched Damian and Charlotte move through every phase of their marriage, with the impassive attention of a man who has learned that seeing things is not the same as having opinions about them. Mrs. Calloway's car arrived at a hotel in Bridgeport at 2:12 this morning, Marcus said, without looking up from the coffee he was pouring. She checked in under her maiden name, paid cash. Damian was quiet for a moment. She's okay. Checked in fine. No issues. You have eyes on the hotel? Parked across the street. Our man's rotating every 3 hours. Damian picked up the coffee Marcus had poured without being asked. It was black and very hot, the way he'd taken it for 20 years. And the heat of the mug against his palm was one of the few sensations that morning that felt like something real and reliable. Nobody approaches her. Nobody makes contact. She doesn't know she's being watched. Understood. If anything changes, you'll know before she's out the door. Marcus refilled his own mug. Logan called twice this morning. Mr. Holloway's assistant called once to confirm the 8 o'clock. Good. Marcus looked at him. Then, briefly, the particular look of a man who has something to say and has decided, correctly, that now is not the time to say it. Then he went back to his coffee, and Damien went back to his study, and they left each other alone in the way that men who have worked together for a long time can leave each other alone, which is to say completely and without awkwardness. Logan Mercer arrived at 6:58. He was 44 years old, broad-shouldered, with a carefully maintained appearance that was several notches more polished than the work he actually did. He had been with Damien since before the organization had become what it currently was, since the leaner and more overtly dangerous years before the legitimate business infrastructure had been built up around the core operation. He was the kind of man who knew exactly where every body was buried, metaphorically and otherwise, and who wore that knowledge with the ease of someone who has never seriously contemplated the weight of it. He came into the study and sat down across the desk without being invited, which was the dynamic between them. Logan didn't wait for permission to sit in rooms he'd been in 1,000 times. He looked at Damien carefully and then looked at the bourbon glass still sitting on the desk corner, untouched and flat now, with most of the night evaporated out of it. "You didn't sleep," Logan said. "I never sleep." "You didn't drink either." He nodded at the glass. "That's different." "Charlotte's in Bridgeport," Damien said. "I want a full secondary sweep of everything in that folder. Every source, every document, every analyst who touched it. I want to know exactly how each piece of evidence was obtained and who had access to it before it came to you." Logan's expression didn't change, which was itself a kind of change. And a man whose face was usually in motion, calculating, processing, managing, the sudden absence of micro-expression was louder than anything he might have said. "We already ran a full verification," he said. "Run it again." "Damien, we had 2 independent analysts." "I don't care about the analysts. I want the chain of custody. Every document, every photograph, the phone. I want to know who touched it before it hit your desk." Damien looked at him. "That's not a request." A pause. Logan leaned back slightly. "What happened last night?" "I sent my wife out into a rainstorm based on evidence that I want verified again from the ground up. That's what happened." He held Logan's gaze. "Is that going to be a problem for you?" Something moved behind Logan's eyes, very fast, like a fish moving beneath dark water. There and gone. "No," he said. "I'll have my people start this morning." "Good. Don't tell Holloway." Another pause, shorter this time, but denser. "Why not?" "Because I said so." Damien picked up his phone and looked at it, a deliberate gesture of dismissal. "Get me what I asked for by noon." Logan stood, adjusted his jacket, and left. He didn't say anything else, which was unusual. Logan Mercer almost always had a parting word, a piece of information, a question, something that established his continued usefulness as he exited a room. The fact that he left without one saddened Damien's chest like a splinter. Richard Holloway arrived at 8:03. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 3 decades navigating the political and legal infrastructure of the state, with enough finesse to remain valuable to people like Damien without ever appearing in any official record to be connected to them. He served as political advisor, institutional liaison, and, when necessary, the kind of fixer who made inconvenient things become convenient again. He was the person who had introduced 2 of the external sources cited in the folder. He settled into the chair across the desk with the unhurried comfort of a man who considers himself essential. "Nasty business last night," he said. "I heard Charlotte left the property." "Word travels fast." Holloway spread his hands slightly. "I have people everywhere, Damien. You know that. That's why you keep me around." He offered a measured, sympathetic expression. It was the right call. Painful, but right. You can't afford sentiment when the organization is under this kind of pressure. Damien watched him. "Tell me about the phone." "The disposable?" "The disposable. The one recovered near the Marcetti operation. Tell me exactly how it came to you." Holloway settled back. "Anonymous tip to one of my field contacts. The contact passed it to me directly. I had it swept and analyzed, and the call logs came back matching activity windows that corresponded to 2 of the 3 security failures we identified in the last quarter." He said it smoothly, the way a man recites something he knows well. Too well, maybe. The smoothness of a rehearsed thing. The analysis was solid. Who is the field contact? A fractional hesitation. I protect my contacts, Damien. You know that. In general, yes. In this specific situation, where the evidence involved was used to remove my wife from my home, I want a name. Holloway's expression shifted into something that was trying to be hurt and landing slightly south of it. I understand you're under strain. What happened last night was genuinely painful, and I don't want to minimize that. But questioning the integrity of evidence that three separate— I'm not asking you to minimize anything, Damien said. I'm asking you for a name. And I'm telling you that I protect my contacts. He held Damien's gaze with the practiced steadiness of someone who has held many uncomfortable gazes over many decades. Give yourself a few days. The pain of this will settle into something you can work with. Charlotte was a liability the organization couldn't afford. She is my wife. She was feeding information to our enemies. I don't know that yet. The silence that followed had an edge to it. Holloway blinked once, slowly, recalibrating. The evidence was thorough. Give me the contact's name, Richard. Another pause, then, I'll see what I can do about making contact through a secondary channel, out of respect for the relationship. He straightened, moved to stand. But I want you to consider the possibility that you're letting grief compromise your judgment. Good evidence is good evidence regardless of who it implicates. He stood. I'll be in touch by end of day. He left. Damien sat in the silence his two visitors had vacated and let himself feel for exactly 30 seconds the specific quality of what he was beginning to understand. Then he picked up his phone and called a number he kept in no directory and had memorized instead, the way he memorized things that mattered. The man who answered worked for no one in the organization. He had no title, no office, no official relationship with anything Damien was connected to. What he had was a particular skill set that straddled the border between forensic accounting and information archaeology. The ability to trace where a document had actually come from, as opposed to where it claimed to have come from. His name was Vincent Okafor, and Damien had used him exactly twice before, both times in situations where the integrity of internal information was in question, and both times Vincent had been correct. I have a job, Damien said. How urgent. Yesterday. Send me what you have. Damien photographed every page of the folder with his phone and sent them through an encrypted channel to a number he would delete as soon as the transfer confirmed. Then he sat back and looked at the center drawer of his desk, the one with the envelope in it, and he thought about Charlotte in a hotel room in Bridgeport with her phone in her hand, declining his calls. He thought about the appointment card. First trimester ultrasound, approximately 10 weeks. She had known she was pregnant before last night. She had known, and she hadn't told him, which meant something, though he wasn't certain yet what it meant. Whether she'd been waiting for the right moment, whether she'd been afraid of what he would say, whether, in some part of herself that had already been watching the slow deterioration of their marriage, she hadn't been sure the news would be welcome. That thought was not comfortable to sit with. He sat with it anyway. The call from Vincent came back in 4 hours, which was faster than either of the previous two jobs, which told Damien something about what Vincent had found before Vincent said a word. The phone is real, Vincent said. I mean, it exists and the call logs are genuine, but the registration trace on the device puts its first activation in a location that is about 40 miles from where it was supposedly recovered. And the recovery documentation, the chain of evidence from field contact to your man Holloway, has a gap in it, about 11 hours where the device is unaccounted for. Damien was very still. What could happen to a device in 11 hours? A lot of things. If someone wanted to add content to the call logs after initial activation, they'd need time and the right tools. 11 hours is more than enough. Brief pause. The handwritten note is more interesting. Go ahead. It's written in a hand that is attempting to replicate a particular person's writing style, but is overcorrected in 3 places. The letter formations in the lowercase r and g are slightly too deliberate. The kind of thing you see when someone has been studying a sample carefully, but is writing consciously rather than automatically. A good forger in a hurry makes this mistake. A good forger with enough time usually doesn't. Another pause. Whoever did this was working fast or working nervous or both. Damien closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. What about the financial transfers? The routing numbers are real, but the account histories are shallow. The oldest transaction in the relevant account is 14 weeks old, which is consistent with an account created specifically to build a paper trail rather than one that evolved naturally over time. Real financial misconduct tends to leave messier records, random amounts, irregular intervals, the kind of noise that comes from actual human behavior. These transfers are too clean, too evenly spaced. Vincent's tone was clinical, the voice of a man who finds patterns in numbers and has long since stopped being surprised by what patterns tell him. Someone built this evidence, Mr. Calloway. Someone with access to your organization's internal communication records, a sample of the target's handwriting, and enough lead time to set up the financial architecture. This took months. Which means it was someone inside. Someone close enough inside to know what kind of evidence would be convincing to you specifically. The folder is calibrated, Mr. Calloway. It's not just fabricated. It's tailored. The line went quiet for a moment. Thank you, Damien said. The full written report will come through the usual channel within 6 hours. The call ended. Damien set the phone down on his desk with the particular care of someone moving an explosive object, and then he sat with the full weight of what Vincent had told him settling across his shoulders like something physical. Someone inside his organization had spent months constructing a false case against his wife, had used internal communications, access to Charlotte's handwriting, the full resources of someone who knew how Damien's mind worked and what evidence he would find convincing to destroy his marriage. The assassination attempt, the folder, the timing. He was assembling something in his head now, not finished yet, but taking shape. The way a photograph develops out of chemical solution, blurry at first, then features, then recognition. He reached for his phone again and opened his contacts and scrolled to Logan's name and hovered over it for a moment. Then he kept scrolling. He called Bates at the hospital instead. Bates answered on the second ring, his voice rough with pain medication but alert. He'd been Damien's head of security for 6 years, a man who understood the difference between loyalty to the organization and loyalty to the man who ran it, and who had, in 6 years, never once confused the two. "How are you?" Damien said. "I've been better. I've also been worse." A pause. "Something's wrong. I need you to think back to the day of the convoy. The route changed to Whitmore Avenue." A beat. "I didn't authorize that." "I know. I'm asking who did." The directive came from Logan, flagged as a secondary precaution because of reported surveillance on the primary route. I logged it as standard protocol and passed it to the drivers. Silence. "You think Logan flagged a false surveillance report to move us to Whitmore?" "I think someone did." He could hear Bates breathing on the other end of the line, the slightly labored breath of a man with a compromised shoulder and a mind that was currently rearranging things very quickly. "The report came in under my authorization code, Sas," Bates said slowly. "I didn't file it, but it has my code." "Is that possible? If someone had access to the security system's administrative tier, and my code specifically..." He stopped. "Logan has administrative access." The room was very quiet. "Get some rest," Damien said. Don't talk to anyone in the organization about this." "Boss?" "Bates." "The woman who's in Bridgeport right now." A pause. "She didn't do it." "I know," Damien said. "I know." He ended the call and stood up from his desk and walked to the window that faced the drive, the same window he'd stood at the night before watching Charlotte's taillights disappear. The grounds were wet and still from the previous night's rain, the grass saturated, the driveway reflecting the gray mid-afternoon sky like dark glass. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had, and was completely different from everything it had been 24 hours ago. Logan Mercer. And he was beginning to suspect Richard Holloway. Two men he had trusted with the architecture of his life. The thing that was hardest to absorb was not the betrayal itself. Damien had been betrayed before, had navigated organizational disloyalty and personal treason across 2 decades in a business that treated both as occupational hazards. What was hardest to absorb was the specific target they had chosen. Not a rival, not a business interest. Charlotte. They had looked at his marriage and identified it as the mechanism through which he could be most efficiently destroyed, and they had been right, which meant they knew him better than he would like anyone to know him, and they had used that knowledge to hollow out the one thing in his life that had nothing to do with power or violence or the long, grinding machinery of who he had become. He needed to find her, not to explain. Not yet. Not with nothing in his hands but suspicion and a forensic accountant's preliminary analysis. He needed something solid before he stood in front of Charlotte again, because if he came to her with half a case and she turned him away, which she would be entirely justified in doing, there would be no second chance after that. He understood this with the clarity of a man who had spent his life calculating leverage and understood exactly how much of it he no longer had. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but the format of the message told him immediately who it was from. Vincent had flagged something new from the financial analysis, something that hadn't been in the first call. Secondary account traces back to a shell registered to a company called Meridian Advisors Group. Meridian's principal officer is listed as 1R Holloway. Damien read the text twice, then he read it a third time. Richard Holloway had not just helped fabricate the evidence. He had used one of his own shell companies to build the financial architecture that was supposed to prove Charlotte's guilt, which meant either he was genuinely stupid, and Richard Holloway was genuinely many things, but stupid was not among them, or he had done it in a moment of arrogance, the specific arrogance of a man who has never seriously believed he would be caught, who has operated for 30 years in the shadow of other people's names and assumed the shadow was permanent. Or it meant he hadn't expected anyone to look this closely, because he hadn't expected Damien to doubt the evidence, because the plan had depended on Damien doing exactly what Damien had done, seeing the folder, believing it, acting on it without digging further. The plan had been calibrated to his psychology, his pride, his paranoia, his capacity for decisive and irrevocable action. And it had worked, almost perfectly, right up until the moment Damien had gone back to straighten a bedroom and reached under a bed frame for a fallen pillow. His daughter. He didn't know yet if it was a daughter. 10 weeks was too early to know. He put the phone in his pocket and walked back to his desk and opened the center drawer and took out the envelope and held it in both hands for a moment. The test inside it, the appointment card, the evidence of a life that had been quietly, privately growing in the woman he had sent out into the rain. He was going to fix this. He didn't know yet exactly how. He didn't know whether Charlotte would let him. He didn't know whether he deserved the opportunity. But he was going to dismantle what Logan and Holloway had built, piece by piece, and he was going to do it carefully and completely. And when it was done, he was going to go to wherever Charlotte was and lay every piece of the truth in front of her and let her decide what happened next. First, though, he needed to understand the full shape of what he was dealing with. He called Logan. It rang twice, and Logan picked up, and his voice was easy and measured, the voice of a man with nothing on his conscience, or a man who has learned to perform that particular quality so well the performance has become indistinguishable from the real thing. "You get anywhere on the secondary sweep?" Damien asked. "My people are working through it," Logan said. "These things take time when you're being thorough." "Of course." Damien kept his voice completely neutral, the practiced flatness of a man who has sat across tables from dangerous people for 20 years and knows that the face is a document others will read as carefully as he reads them. "I appreciate the diligence. One more thing. Do you know a company called Meridian Advisors Group?" A pause. Not long. Not the kind of pause that would register as significant to someone who wasn't paying attention. But Damien was paying very close attention, and the pause lasted approximately 1 second longer than it should have for a man who had genuinely never heard that name before. "Can't say I do," Logan said. "Should I?" "Probably not," Damien said. "Never mind. Keep me posted on the sweep." He ended the call, stood in the silence of his study. Logan knew. Logan knew that Damien was pulling on a thread, and Logan had just heard the specific thread that was being pulled, and somewhere on the other side of that phone call, Logan Mercer was currently making decisions about what came next, which meant the timeline that Damien had imagined, careful, methodical, building a complete case before moving, had just compressed dramatically. Because a man who has conspired to destroy your marriage and route a convoy into an ambush does not sit quietly once he understands that his co-conspirator's shell company has been identified. Logan was going to move, which meant Damien had to move first. He was reaching for his phone to call Marcus when it rang in his hand, a number he didn't recognize, Connecticut area code, and something made him answer it anyway. The instinct of a man who has learned that the calls he doesn't want to take are usually the ones he most needs to hear. "Mr. Calloway?" A woman's voice, older, careful. My name is Evelyn Parker. I don't expect you to know who I am, but I think you should know that your wife arrived at my door in Gloucester, Massachusetts this morning in the rain, and she is safe. She asked me not to contact you. A brief pause. I'm not entirely sure why I'm doing it anyway, except that she looks like a woman carrying something very heavy, and I've been alive long enough to know that some weights aren't meant to be carried alone. Another pause. I won't call again. I just thought you should know she's safe. The line went dead. Damien stood with the phone against his ear for a moment after the call ended, listening to nothing. Gloucester, Massachusetts. She had driven north through the night. She hadn't stopped in Bridgeport after all. Marcus's man had watched an empty hotel while Charlotte kept moving, kept going, putting more miles between herself and everything that had happened in this house. She had ended up on the Massachusetts coast, on someone's doorstep, in the rain, and a stranger had called him, without being asked, because she had looked at Charlotte's face and seen something she recognized. He lowered the phone. Logan was moving somewhere on the other side of the city. Holloway's shell company was sitting in Vincent's analysis like a lit fuse. Charlotte was in Gloucester, carrying his child, in a stranger's house, in the rain. Damien Calloway had spent 20 years making decisions from a position of calculated strength, from the high ground, with information and resources and time to deploy them precisely. He had never been a man who operated from desperation, because he had never allowed circumstances to reach the point where desperation was the available position. He was there now, and the decisions he made in the next 24 hours were going to determine whether he got his family back, or whether Logan Mercer and Richard Holloway had already taken from him the one thing he had never adequately protected because he had never fully admitted, even to himself, how much it mattered. He put the envelope back in the drawer. He called Marcus. I need the car, he said, and I need you to put surveillance on Logan Mercer and Richard Holloway as of right now. Both of them. Every movement. He paused. And Marcus, do it quietly. Nobody in the organization knows about this except you and me. A beat of silence. How bad is it? Marcus said. Damien looked at the center drawer of his desk. It's as bad as it gets, he said. The car was on the highway before Marcus had finished confirming the surveillance detail on Logan and Holloway, and Damien was in the back seat with his phone in one hand and the envelope in the other, and the Connecticut landscape was moving past the tinted windows in the gray and waterlogged aftermath of last night's storm. Broken branches on the shoulder, standing water in the low median, the sky the color of old concrete pressing down on everything. He had not told Marcus where he was going. He'd said north and left it at that. And Marcus, who had been with him long enough to understand when a destination was and wasn't his business, had relayed the instruction to the driver and gone back to coordinating the surveillance operation without asking follow-up questions. That was the thing about Marcus Trent that Damien had come to depend on without ever fully acknowledging the dependence. The man understood the difference between information he needed to do his job and information that belonged to someone else's life. And he kept those two categories permanently separated. The drive to Gloucester was just under 3 hours. Damien spent the first hour on the phone with Vincent, walking through the full written report that had come through the encrypted channel while he was still in the study. The Meridian Advisors connection was cleaner and more incriminating than even the initial text had suggested. The shell company had been incorporated 7 years ago, originally used for legitimate political fundraising work, the kind of adjacent to legal financial architecture that political operatives built as a matter of professional habit. But 14 weeks ago, a new subsidiary account had been opened under the Meridian umbrella, routed through 2 intermediary companies that existed only on paper, and it was into this account that the fabricated financial transfers attributed to Charlotte had been staged. The money had never gone anywhere. The transfers were internal, circular, designed to generate a paper record rather than actually move funds. It was the financial equivalent of a movie set, convincing from the front, nothing behind it. Holloway built it to look like the kind of financial misconduct that's hard to trace quickly, Vincent said. Under normal circumstances, with your organization's resources focused on a security crisis, nobody would have had time or reason to dig this deep. The evidence was designed to be believed in a crisis, not examined in calm daylight. How long would it have taken to build this architecture? Months. The intermediary companies have filing dates going back to late winter. Whoever initiated this was planning it before the current security situation escalated. which meant before the war with the Marchetti family had reached its current intensity, which meant the plan had not been a reaction to the crisis. The crisis had been engineered around the plan. The Marchetti pressure, the convoy ambush, the folder arriving at exactly the moment Damien was most raw and most willing to believe the worst. None of it had been coincidental. All of it had been sequenced. He sat with that for a long time after the call ended. The second hour of the drive he spent in silence, watching the landscape shift from Connecticut suburb to Rhode Island shoreline to the harder, older texture of the Massachusetts coast, stonier, less manicured, the kind of landscape that looked like it had been here long before anyone arrived and planned to be here long after everyone left. There was something clarifying about it, something that stripped away the accumulated noise of the last 24 hours and left him with just the essential facts arranged in a row. Logan Mercer and Richard Holloway had conspired to remove Charlotte from his life. They had done it deliberately, methodically, over months, using his own psychology against him. They had succeeded, at least for now. And the reason they had done it was still not entirely clear, which was the part that scratched at him most, because Damien did not like operating in situations where the motivation was opaque. He understood power and money and fear and ambition. He understood the calculus of men who make decisions based on those things. What he did not yet understand was why eliminating Charlotte had been necessary to whatever Logan and Holloway were actually building. The third thing they needed, he realized, was whatever they planned to do once he was destabilized. A man undone by grief. A man who had just destroyed his marriage. A man sleeping badly and making decisions from emotional wreckage rather than clear strategic thinking. What did you do with a man like that? What could you take from him or push him toward that you couldn't take or push while he was functioning correctly? He was still working through the answer when the driver took the Gloucester exit and the Atlantic appeared at the end of a long downhill road, gray and enormous and indifferent. And Damien looked at it through the window and thought about Charlotte driving up here through last night's storm with her suitcase in the trunk and his child inside her and nowhere in particular to go except away. The Parker house was a white clapboard colonial set back from the harbor road behind a low stone wall and a salt-blasted garden that had mostly finished for the season. A retired nurse's house, that was what the brief Marcus had compiled on Evelyn Parker said. 68 years old, widowed, no criminal record, no known organizational connections. The kind of person who answered doors in storms for women with nowhere to go because that was simply who she was. Damien had the driver stop at the end of the lane. He got out alone. He walked up the path to the front door with the envelope in his inside jacket pocket and his hands in plain sight, which was not a habit but felt right for this particular approach. He knocked. Evelyn Parker answered in under a minute, a compact woman with white hair cut practically short and eyes that assessed him with the efficient calm of someone who has seen a great deal of distress walk through her door over the years and has learned to read it quickly. "Mr. Calloway," she said, not surprised. She'd been expecting him, or something like him. "Mrs. Parker." He kept his voice quiet. "I'm not here to take anyone anywhere." She looked at him for a long moment with the patient, slightly skeptical attention of a woman who has heard many things from men standing at her door and has learned not to take the first version at face value. Then she stepped back and let him in. "She's in the back," Evelyn said. "She doesn't know you're here." A pause. "She's not going to be glad to see you." "I know." "Then I'll let you explain yourself." She gestured toward a hallway. "Kitchen's at the end." He walked down the hallway, which smelled of coffee and old wood, and the particular salt damp that coastal houses carry permanently in their walls, and he stopped at the kitchen doorway. Charlotte was sitting at a worn wooden table with both hands wrapped around a mug, looking out the window at the harbor. She was wearing the same gray sweater, and she hadn't done anything with her hair, and she looked exhausted in a way that went several layers deeper than physical tiredness. The exhaustion of someone whose internal landscape has been rearranged overnight, and who hasn't yet had time to learn how to move through the new configuration. She became aware of him a moment before he said anything, the way she always had. Some peripheral awareness she'd never been able to explain, the particular pressure of his presence in a room. He watched her shoulders change. She didn't turn around. "You tracked me," she said. "A woman named Evelyn Parker called me. I didn't give her your location. She called to tell me you were safe." A pause. He watched Charlotte absorb that, process it, file it in whatever place she was keeping the information that didn't fit the story she was currently trying to maintain about the world. What do you want, Damien? He came into the kitchen and sat down across from her, putting himself in her eye line so she didn't have to choose whether to look at him. She looked at him. Her face had the particular quality of someone who has finished crying recently. Not swollen, just stripped, the way a surface looks after something has been cleaned off it. The evidence against you was fabricated, he said. All of it. The phone, the financial transfers, the handwritten note, manufactured beginning to end over a period of approximately 4 to 5 months by people inside my organization. She was very still. I know that, she said. I know you know. I'm telling you that I know it now too. He held her gaze. I should have known it last night. I didn't. That's on me. Charlotte set her mug down on the table slowly. Who? Logan Mercer and Richard Holloway. Something moved through her face. Not surprise exactly. More like the particular expression of someone who hears information that confirms what they already, on some level, suspected. Logan, she said quietly, he never liked me. That might be the simplest part of his motivation. Damien laced his hands on the table. I don't have the full picture yet on why, but the architecture of what they built took months. This wasn't impulsive. No, she said. It wasn't. She looked out the window at the harbor again. The water was flat and gray under the overcast sky, a few boats moving at the far edge of visibility. Damien, yeah, knowing it was fabricated doesn't undo last night. She said it without particular anger. The anger had been and gone, he suspected, sometime in the small hours between Connecticut and Massachusetts, and what was left was something quieter and more durable. You looked at me and you chose a folder over my word. And I need you to understand that I'm not saying that to punish you. I'm saying it because it's true, and because we have to start from what's true or there's no point in starting at all. I understand that. Do you? She turned back to him. Because you've said things like that before. I understand. I hear you. And then 3 days later, it's like the conversation never happened, because something comes up and the organization needs you, and I go back to being the thing you'll get to when there's time. She stopped, pressed her lips together. There's never time. He didn't say anything to that. There was nothing useful to say. I'm pregnant, she said. I know. Her eyes sharpened slightly. You found it. He reached into his jacket and put the envelope on the table between them. She looked at it for a long moment without touching it. He watched something move through her face, complex and not entirely readable, the way things were when they were genuinely felt rather than performed. She put her hand on the envelope but didn't open it. I was going to tell you, she said. I'd been trying to figure out the right moment for 2 weeks. There's never a right moment in your house, in your life. There's always something happening that's more urgent than whatever I need to say. She looked up at him. And then last night happened, and I walked out, and I forgot it was there. Charlotte, his phone went off. Not a call. A series of rapid alerts from the surveillance application Marcus had activated on Holloway and Logan, the kind of clustered notifications that indicated significant simultaneous movement. He looked at the screen. Both men had left their respective locations within 4 minutes of each other. Logan's car was heading south toward the Harbor District. Holloway's driver had taken him to an address in East Providence that the surveillance system had flagged automatically, a location associated with the Marcetti family's legitimate real estate holdings. Damien looked at that last piece of information and felt something drop through him like a weight through deep water. Holloway was going to the Marcetti family, not metaphorically, not through intermediaries. Directly to a Marcetti-connected address in the middle of the day, with Marcus's surveillance tracking every turn. He stood up. Charlotte watched him stand. Something in her face closed down very slightly, the specific expression of a woman watching something happen that she has watched happen many times before. The moment when the other world intrudes on whatever space they had managed to create between just the two of them. I have to make a call, he said. Of course you do. Charlotte, go. She turned back to the window. You always do. He stepped into the hallway and called Marcus, keeping his voice low. Tell me about the Providence address, he said the moment Marcus picked up. Commercial property registered to a holding company. The holding company's ultimate beneficial owner, according to the corporate registry, is a man named Anthony Marcetti. A pause. Damien, there's more. Tell me. We picked up communication intercepts from the secondary line Logan uses for operational contacts. Came in 20 minutes ago. Marcus's voice had shifted into the register he used when information was very bad. Not louder, precisely the opposite, a kind of deliberate quietness, as if lowering the volume might reduce the impact. They know you went north. They know where you are. Damien went very still in the hallway. Say that again. Someone in our surveillance chain, the man watching the Bridgeport Hotel, or the man I tasked to run background on the Parker property when you said you were heading north, one of them is not ours. Logan has someone in our immediate operational layer. The surveillance chain, the people Marcus had personally activated in the last 3 hours. One of them was feeding information directly to Logan, which meant Logan knew Damien was in Gloucester, which meant Logan knew Charlotte was in Gloucester, which meant whatever Logan was driving toward right now was not a meeting. It was the next move, and the next move was informed by the knowledge that Damien Calloway was 3 hours from home, without his security detail, sitting in a retired nurse's kitchen with the woman they had already used once as leverage. Marcus. His voice was very controlled. How many people do we have on Logan right now? 2 cars, 4 men. I need them repositioned. Right now. Get me the closest available people to the Gloucester Harbor area. He calculated. Closest means within the hour. I can have 2 men there in 45 minutes. 45 minutes isn't good enough. He kept his voice down and moved farther from the kitchen doorway. Logan is not driving somewhere for a meeting. He's driving to create a situation. I need you to understand that and respond to it. A brief pause on Marcus's end. The pause of a man recalibrating his threat assessment in real time. I'll redirect everyone we have. 40 minutes, best I can do. Do you have anything on site? Nothing. He almost never traveled without security. Tonight he had made an exception because he needed to arrive here as a human being rather than as an organizational apparatus. And Logan had known that. Logan had counted on that, perhaps, because Logan knew how Damien thought. My driver, that's it. Okay. Marcus's voice had gone completely flat and operational, which was the mode Damien needed him in. Keep her inside. I'll have people moving in the next 5 minutes. Damien ended the call and stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds, looking at the kitchen doorway. He went back in. Charlotte was still at the table, still looking at the window, but she turned when he came in, and whatever she saw in his face made her straighten very slightly, the unconscious postural adjustment of someone whose nervous system has just received a signal. What happened? She said. I need you to stay in this house. He kept his voice level. Don't go near the windows, and don't open the door for anyone except me. She stared at him. Damien, I made a mistake coming here without more people. He came to the table and crouched down so he was at her eye level, which was not a position he adopted naturally, but which felt necessary right now. Necessary to make clear that this was not an order being issued from above, but a reckoning being delivered between 2 people at the same height. Logan knows you're here. I don't know yet what he's planning to do with that information, but I need to make sure you're safe before I can find out. She looked at his face carefully, the way she'd always read him, all the layers beneath the controlled surface. How bad? I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. He held her gaze. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Do you understand me? Something moved in her expression. Not softening, not forgiveness, just a recognition of something, some quality in his voice or his face that she was filing away to examine later when there was time. I heard you, she said. He stood up and found Evelyn Parker in the hallway, who had the bearing of a woman who has overheard enough to understand the situation and has already decided how she is going to respond to it. She was holding a phone. I heard you talking, she said simply. My neighbor 2 doors down is a retired state trooper. I've already called him. Damien looked at her for a moment. Thank you. I didn't do it for you. She met his eyes with calm directness. Lock the back door, she said over her shoulder to Charlotte. I'll handle the front. He went outside. The lane was quiet, the harbor road beyond the stone wall empty in both directions, the flat gray water visible at the end of the street. His driver, a young man named Reyes who had been with the organization for 18 months, and whose primary qualification was an almost eerie ability to remain calm in vehicle-based emergencies, was out of the car and standing at the hood when Damien came through the gate. "We've got a problem," Damien said. "I know. Marcus called me directly." Reyes was looking down the road. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before anyone Logan sends can get here from Providence." "If they left when he did." "Yeah." A pause. "If they left when he did." Damien looked at the harbor, the water, the boats at their moorings, patient and nautical and completely uninvested in what was happening on the road above them. He thought about the full shape of what Logan and Holloway had built, the months of preparation, the layered evidence, the mole inside Marcus's surveillance chain, the trip Holloway was making right now to the Marcetti family's East Providence address. This was not a conspiracy that ended with Charlotte being removed from the mansion. This was a conspiracy that had been using Charlotte as the first move in something larger, something that required Damien to be destabilized and isolated, and then what? Then what? That was the piece he still didn't have. His phone rang. Unknown number, Connecticut area code, different from the number Evelyn Parker had used. He answered. "Mr. Calloway." A man's voice, older, careful, the voice of someone measuring every word. "My name is unimportant. What's important is that I work for the organization, and I have for 11 years. And what I know about what Logan Mercer and Richard Holloway have been planning is something you need to hear immediately." Damien waited. "They're not trying to weaken you," the voice said. "They're planning a transfer, a full handover of organizational control to the Marcetti family, structured as a merger, executed in a way that makes it look like a voluntary decision by a man who has lost his judgment." A pause. "The evidence against your wife wasn't meant to punish her. It was meant to be the first visible sign of your deterioration. A man who turns on his own wife on bad evidence. That's a man the organization loses confidence in. That's a man who can be replaced." The harbor, the gray water. Reyes standing at the hood of the car. "They need you off balance for one more thing," the voice continued. "Something that makes the case for removal irrefutable, and they've already put it in motion." Another pause, and in the pause, Damien could hear the specific quality of someone about to say a thing they have been building toward the whole conversation. "They're going to take your wife, Mr. Calloway, not to hurt her, to use her. A man who loses his wife to his own recklessness and then loses her again to the people he was supposed to protect her from. That's a man whose people will accept a change in leadership." The voice went very quiet. "They left an hour ago. Not from Providence, from New Haven. They've been ahead of you the whole time." The call went dead. Damien turned and looked at the Parker house. 30 minutes had become 60 seconds, maybe less, and his driver and a retired state trooper and a 68-year-old retired nurse were what stood between his pregnant wife and men who had spent months engineering this exact moment, and the closest backup Marcus could send was 40 minutes away, and every decision Damien had made in the last 24 hours had been the wrong one. And the organization he had built over 20 years was being sold out from under him. And the woman he had sent into the rain for a lie was sitting at a kitchen table in the house at the end of this lane. He started moving. He was through the front door before Reyes had taken 3 steps after him. The hallway was empty. He called Charlotte's name and his voice came back wrong off the narrow walls. Too loud, the kind of echo a house makes when something has changed in it. Evelyn Parker appeared from the side room off the hallway, her face composed in the way of someone working very hard to maintain composure, and she pointed toward the back of the house without speaking. Charlotte was at the kitchen table exactly where he'd left her, but she was standing now and she had the house phone in her hand, and she was looking at the back door with the focused attention of someone who has just heard something outside it. "There was a sound," she said. "Someone in the back garden." Damien crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and put himself between her and the back door. Through the door's small window, he could see the garden. Stone path, dormant flower beds, a low wooden fence at the back boundary, and beyond the fence a narrow service lane running behind the row of properties. A gray van was parked in the lane, engine running, and he could see the condensation of its exhaust in the cold air. 2 men visible, both facing the fence. One of them was on a phone. They hadn't come through yet. They were waiting for something, a signal, a confirmation, a moment that hadn't arrived yet, which meant whoever had called him from New Haven had given him something real, which meant there were seconds left, not minutes. He turned back to Charlotte. Is there a basement? I don't. She looked at Evelyn. Root cellar off the pantry, Evelyn said. She was already moving toward the pantry door, the particular movement of a woman who has decided what role she is playing in this and is committed to it. Stone walls, no windows. Go, Damien said. Damien. Charlotte, please. She looked at him for 1 second, one full second of the particular look she had, the one that read everything in him at once and processed it faster than language. And then she followed Evelyn into the pantry. He heard the creak of a hatch, footsteps on wooden stairs, and then the hatch closing. He turned back to the door. Reyes was beside him now, having come in through the front in the 20 seconds since Damien had left him. He was 26 years old and looked younger, with the compact, quiet physicality of someone who has learned to move efficiently and keep his reactions internal. He had a weapon in his hand that Damien hadn't known he was carrying, which was exactly what you wanted from a driver in this situation. Back fence, Damien said quietly. Reyes looked through the window. 2 outside. Could be more in the van. The trooper Evelyn called. Pulled up out front 2 minutes ago. He's an old man, boss. He's an old man with a gun and a radio. Damien moved to the side window, the one that gave a partial view of the lane from a different angle. He could see now that the van's side door was partially open. A third figure inside, seated, not moving. They want her alive. That's the only leverage model that works for what they're doing. They're not here to kill anyone. They're here to take her. That doesn't mean they won't hurt people who get in the way. No? He looked at Reyes. It doesn't. His phone vibrated. Marcus, a text. 12 minutes, everyone moving. Hold. 12 minutes was a very long time. The back fence moved. One of the men outside had stepped up onto something, a crate, the bottom fence rail, and was looking over into the garden, assessing. He was broad across the back, wearing a dark jacket, moving with the deliberate patience of someone who has done this kind of work before and knows that impatience is where operations go wrong. The second man had moved to the gate in the fence, which was latched but not locked. Damien made a decision. He opened the back door and walked out into the garden. The cold hit him immediately, the salt-edged Massachusetts coastal cold that was different from Connecticut cold. Wetter, more penetrating, the kind that found its way through fabric and settled against the skin. The stone path was slick from last night's rain. He walked to the middle of the garden and stopped and looked at the man looking over the fence, and the man looked back at him, and for 3 seconds, nobody moved. Tell Logan to call me, Damien said. His voice was level and carried well in the cold air. The man on the fence didn't say anything. He dropped back down into the lane, and Damien could hear low voices, a brief exchange, and then a phone rang in the lane and was answered, and there was a longer silence, and then his own phone buzzed in his pocket. Logan. He answered. You're wasting time you don't have, Damien said. I'm looking at the opposite situation. Logan's voice was the voice of a man sitting somewhere warm and comfortable with full information, the tone of controlled satisfaction that belonged to someone who believed he had already won the hand and was now simply waiting for the other player to lay down his cards. You've got one driver and a retired cop who's old enough to have arthritis in his trigger hand. I've got 4 men on site and 2 more coming up the harbor road. Marcus has people 12 minutes out. 12 minutes is generous. A pause. I'm not trying to hurt her, Damien. That was never the play. I just need her with me for a few days while the transition gets formalized. After that, she walks away fine, the baby walks away fine, and you get to live whatever private life you build for yourself after this. After you hand my organization to the Marcetti family. A silence. Brief but real, the silence of a man recalibrating how much Damien knew. It's not a handover, Logan said. It's a consolidation. The East Coast operation gets stronger, not weaker. You've been running it as a personal fiefdom for 20 years and you're tired, Damien. Anyone who knows you can see it. You just don't see it yourself. And Charlotte is what? Collateral for my cooperation during the transition. Insurance. The word came out clean and businesslike, the way Logan had always said unpleasant things, wrapping them in the vocabulary of management until they sounded like operational decisions rather than crimes. Just insurance. Nothing happens to her if you don't make it necessary. Damien looked at the fence. He could hear the 2 men on the other side of it, the small sounds of people waiting for a signal. He could feel the cold working through his jacket. He could feel his own heartbeat, which was slower than it should have been, Slower than the situation seemed to warrant, the way it always went slow in moments like this. Not calm, exactly, but something that lived on the other side of fear. In the place where a person has accepted all possible outcomes and is therefore no longer distracted by the worst ones. Logan, he said. Yeah. I'm not going to let you take her. A pause. You don't have the pieces on the board to stop it. Maybe not, but I'm standing in the garden and you're on a phone somewhere, and the 4 men you have on site are going to have to come through me to get to her. He kept his voice completely even. And you know me well enough to know what that means. Another silence, longer this time. Don't be stupid, Logan said. This doesn't have to get ugly. You made it ugly 4 months ago when you started building a case against my wife. Something moved in his voice then, just slightly, a hairline fracture in the controlled surface that he allowed because Logan needed to hear it. Come get her yourself if you want her that badly. Come do it yourself and look me in the face while you do it. The line went dead. 10 seconds later, the gate in the back fence opened. The 2 men came in fast, not running, the controlled rapid movement of trained people entering a space they'd already assessed. The broad-shouldered one in front, the second flanking left to cut off the angle to the house. Professional spacing, professional pace, the kind of entry that was designed to overwhelm resistance before it could organize itself. Damien didn't move from the center of the garden. The broad-shouldered man pulled up 2 feet in front of him, close enough that Damien could see the particular flatness in his eyes that belonged to men who had learned to keep their emotions entirely out of their work. He was perhaps 35, with the kind of face that had absorbed damage over the years and kept its basic structure through sheer bone density. Step aside, the man said. No. What happened next was fast and not clean and made the stone path more treacherous than it already was. The man moved first, a grab at Damien's jacket collar, and Damien turned inside it and drove his elbow back, and the man's grip broke. And then they were close enough that technique mattered less than weight and intent, and Damien had 20 years of surviving situations in which losing was not an option. He took 2 hits, one across the left side of his face that made the morning go briefly white at the edges, one to the ribs that would make breathing interesting for the next several days. And he gave back more than he took because he knew this garden and the man in front of him didn't, and because some things are more motivating than professional training. The second man was coming around from the left, and Reyes stepped out of the doorway, and the second man's attention divided for just long enough. It was a bad few minutes in a small garden in coastal Massachusetts. It was not the worst few minutes of Damien Calloway's life, but it was in the conversation. By the time it was over, he was on one knee on the stone path with blood from his eyebrow tracking down the left side of his face, and both men from the lane were on the ground, and Reyes was standing over the nearer one with his weapon out and breathing like he'd run a hard mile. You're bleeding, Reyes said. I know. Damien got to his feet. His ribs said things he chose to ignore. The van. The third man from the van had come through the gate while the garden situation was resolving, and he stopped when he saw the 2 men on the ground, and did the math quickly, and looked at Damien standing in the middle of the stone path with blood on his face, and the math told him something, and he made a choice that was probably the most intelligent choice he'd made all week, which was to step back through the gate and put the fence between himself and the garden. A car door slammed in the lane. The van's engine revved. Damien walked to the gate and looked into the lane. The van was moving, pulling forward toward the Harbor Road exit, the third man in the passenger seat. At the Harbor Road end of the lane, a car had pulled across the entrance, blocking the exit, and 2 men Damien recognized as Marcus's people were out of it, and the van had stopped. 9 minutes. Marcus had cut it to 9. He stood in the gateway for a moment with his hand on the fence post and let himself breathe, fully, for what felt like the first time since he'd gotten the phone call in Evelyn Parker's hallway. The breathing hurt, which was useful because it kept him present and out of the part of his mind that was starting to calculate forward into the next phase of this. He went back inside. The pantry hatch opened before he reached it, and Charlotte came up the stairs and she stopped when she saw his face. The blood, the state of his jacket, the particular way he was holding himself slightly sideways to protect the ribs, and her face did something complicated and immediate and human that she didn't have time to compose into anything more neutral. How bad? She said. Fine. You're bleeding on Evelyn's floor. I know. I'll apologize to her. He came to the kitchen table and sat down because his ribs were now communicating with considerable insistence and standing was becoming a negotiation. We have a few minutes before Marcus's people secure the area. After that, I need to make some calls. Charlotte got a dish towel from the counter and came to the table and sat across from him and held the towel out. He took it and pressed it to his eyebrow, and she watched him do it with her hands flat on the table and her face in the stripped, careful expression he'd been seeing since last night. The expression of someone who has taken down all the paintings from the walls and hasn't decided yet what to put back up. Logan had men outside this house, she said. Yes. Because you came here alone. Yes. Because you didn't want to come here with security. She looked at him. Because you didn't want to arrive with... What? An entourage. A convoy. The whole apparatus. He held the towel to his face and didn't say anything for a moment. I wanted to come here as myself, not as what I am. What you are is why they knew to come here at all. I know that. She looked at her hands on the table. The harbor was visible through the kitchen window, flat and gray and utterly unaffected by everything. What happens now? Now I dismantle them. Logan and Holloway, the infrastructure they built, the Marcetti connection, all of it. He paused. And I'm going to need to make decisions about how I do that. What kind of decisions? He looked at her directly, the kind that mean I can't stay what I am, not completely. He let that sit for a moment. I've been building a case in my head since last night. Everything Vincent found, the surveillance on Holloway's meeting with the Marcetti people, the mole in Marcus's chain, it's enough. It's more than enough for federal investigators to work with. Something shifted in her face. You'd go to the federal government. I'd give them what they need to take down the Marcetti operation, the political infrastructure Holloway built for them, and the conspiracy against my organization, in exchange for which the focus of any investigation goes where the evidence points. He kept his eyes on her. Which is at them, not at me. And your organization gets restructured. Legitimate operations stay. The rest gets wound down. He let out a slow breath that pulled at his ribs. It's not as simple as I'm making it sound. It'll take time. It'll cost me everything I built that wasn't worth keeping. A pause. Which turns out to be most of it. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Evelyn Parker had appeared in the doorway and was listening with the discreet attention of a woman who has decided that this kitchen is not currently hers, but who is not quite willing to leave it entirely. Outside, Damien could hear car doors and voices as Marcus's people finished securing the lane. You'd actually do it, Charlotte said. Not a question. She was reading him the way she always read him, all the layers, and she was finding something in there that she was trying to decide what to do with. I'm doing it, he said. I just told you. I mean, she stopped, pressed her lips together. You'd actually burn it down, not as a gesture, not to get me back. Actually do it. Yes. She looked at the towel against his eyebrow, the blood that had tracked down into his jaw. She looked at his hands on the table, the knuckles that would be bruised by tomorrow. She looked at his face, which had been a controlled and revealing nothing for 20 years, and which was right now revealing something she had not seen in a very long time. I'm not coming home because you burned it down, she said. I want you to understand that. I'm not a reward for doing the right thing. I know. And I'm not making any decisions tonight. She looked at the window. About anything. I'm not asking you to. I need time, Damien. Her voice had the particular quality of someone saying something they have thought through carefully and are committed to regardless of the response it produces. Real time, not 3 days, and then the organization needs you, and everything goes back to the way it was. I need time to understand who you are when the empire is gone. Because I don't know that person. You don't know that person. No, he said. I don't. That scares me more than Logan's men in the garden. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. Me too. His phone rang. Marcus. He looked at the screen and then looked at Charlotte, and she made a small gesture with her hand. Go ahead, the gesture said, because some things don't change overnight, and she knew that. And he answered. Holloway never made it back out of the Providence meeting, Marcus said. There was something tight in his voice, the controlled tightness of bad information being delivered efficiently. Our man on the scene said the meeting ran long, and then Holloway came out with 2 Marcetti people and got in their car instead of his own. A pause. He's with them, Damien. Voluntarily. Damien was still. Holloway flipped, he said. Looks that way. Which means the Marsetti family has everything Holloway knows. The financial architecture, the evidence chain, the names of every person in our organization who was involved in the conspiracy. Another pause. Shorter, denser. And Holloway knows about the federal angle. He knows you've used federal contacts before. If he's given that to the Marsetti family, they'll move to neutralize it before I can activate it. Damien's mind was already 3 steps ahead, laying the board. How fast can I get a federal contact on the phone? Depends which contact. The one in the organized crime division, the one who's been building the Marsetti case independently for 2 years. He stood up from the table, ribs and all, because sitting was no longer compatible with what was happening in his head. The one who called me 18 months ago and offered me a conversation I declined. A beat of silence. I can have a number in 10 minutes. Make it 5. He looked at Charlotte across the table. And get me a car that isn't the one Logan's people have had eyes on all day. Something clean. Where are you going? He held Charlotte's gaze as he answered. I'm going to finish this tonight, he said, before Holloway gives them the time to prepare for it. Charlotte stood up from the table. She was watching him with the full force of her attention, not the carefully managed, affectionate but guarded attention of the last year of their marriage, but the original version, the version from before the distance had built up, the version that saw him completely and didn't look away from what it saw. Don't get killed, she said. It was not romantic. It was not a declaration. It was a woman who was still angry, still hurt, still far from any decision, telling him the one thing she was willing to say out loud right now. He held her gaze for one moment. I'll be back, he said. He walked out of Evelyn Parker's kitchen and into the cold Massachusetts afternoon, and behind him the house held the 2 women inside it like something cupped between 2 hands. And ahead of him the lane was full of Marcus's people and the secured van and the gray harbor light dying at the edges of the afternoon. He had one phone call to make before everything else. He made it standing beside the unfamiliar car Marcus's man had left at the end of the lane, his breath misting in the cold, the taste of blood still at the corner of his mouth, the envelope with the pregnancy test and the appointment card still in his inside jacket pocket, where he'd put it before he walked out of his study 12 hours and a lifetime ago. The federal agent answered on the second ring. Mr. Calloway, said the voice on the other end, measured, careful, the voice of a man who has been waiting a long time for this particular call and has made his peace with the waiting. I wasn't sure I'd ever hear from you. I have everything you need to take down the Marsetti family and Richard Holloway's political network, Damien said. All of it. Financial records, organizational charts, the shell company architecture, recorded communications. He looked at the harbor. I need to move tonight, before they know I'm moving. A pause. What do you need from us? I need 2 federal agents at a location I'm going to give you in the next 30 minutes. I need them to hear what I have to say, and I need them authorized to begin intake procedures immediately. He paused. And I need assurances in writing about the scope of what comes back at my operation in exchange for what I'm giving you. That's a conversation we need to have in person. Then let's have it. He got in the car. I'm coming to you. The driver pulled out of the lane and onto the harbor road and turned south, and Gloucester fell away behind them. And somewhere in the root cellar of a white clapboard house, a woman with dark hair and bare feet had sat and listened to a storm and decided nothing yet, and the Atlantic was gray and enormous and persistent alongside the road. And Damien Calloway rode toward the last thing he was going to have to burn down before he could find out who he was on the other side of the fire. The federal building in Boston was the kind of place designed to communicate institutional permanence. Gray granite, fluorescent interiors, the smell of recycled air, and old coffee that seemed to be standard issue in every government building Damien had ever entered, regardless of city or decade. He arrived at 9:40 in the evening with dried blood on the left side of his face that he'd cleaned as well as he could in a gas station bathroom outside Rockport, a cracked rib that had announced itself definitively somewhere around Beverly, and a phone full of encrypted files that represented the most complete documented case against the Marsetti family's East Coast operation that had ever existed outside of a law enforcement database. Special Agent Diana Reyes, no relation to his driver, a coincidence he noted and set aside, was 43 years old, with the particular quality of exhaustion that belonged to people who had been working a single large case for a very long time. She met him in a secure conference room on the fourth floor with a deputy named Carver, who didn't say much, and a recorder on the table between them, and the specific expression of someone who has learned not to let hope arrive too early, because hope that arrives early tends to leave the same way. She looked at his face when he sat down. "Do you need a medic?" "After," he said. She looked at him for one more moment, assessing, and then she pulled her chair in and opened a legal pad and said, "Then let's start from the beginning." He talked for 3 hours. He talked about the Meridian Shell Company and the fabricated evidence chain. He talked about the Whitmore Avenue ambush and the false surveillance report filed under Bates's authorization code. He talked about the mole inside Marcus's surveillance operation, a man named Delaney who had been with the organization for 4 years and whose loyalty, it turned out, had been purchased by Logan Mercer 2 years before any of this began. He talked about Richard Holloway's 3 decades of political infrastructure, the names of the elected officials whose campaigns he'd funded through Meridian and its subsidiaries, the judges and the zoning commissioners, and the 2 state senators whose relationships with Holloway had never appeared in any public record. He transferred the encrypted files to the federal system in the room, while Agent Reyes's deputy worked through them on a separate terminal, occasionally looking up with the expression of a man finding exactly what he was told he would find, which was its own kind of testimony. He talked about Logan's role in the Marcetti consolidation plan, the proposed organizational merger, the timetable, the mechanism by which a manufactured crisis of confidence in Damien's leadership would be used to justify the transition. He had recordings of 2 phone calls between Logan and a Marcetti lieutenant named Caruso that Marcus had intercepted through the surveillance operation, and he played both of them into the room's recording system while Agent Reyes sat very still and listened and made notes on her legal pad in a small, precise hand. At 12:45 in the morning, she put her pen down. "This is enough," she said. Not triumphant, just factual, the way a person states a thing they have been working toward for 2 years and have finally arrived at. "This is more than enough. I need the written assurance about the scope of any investigation into my operations before I leave this room." She looked at him steadily. "You understand what restructuring means in practice?" "I do. Legitimate operations you can document stay untouched. Anything we find in the course of working the Marchetti case that points back at your organization gets handled according to what the evidence actually shows." She held his gaze. "I can't give you immunity for things we find independently. What I can give you is a formal agreement that the Marcetti case and the Holloway network are the primary investigative targets and that your cooperation is documented and weighed accordingly. That's acceptable." Carver printed the agreement at 20 minutes past 1 in the morning. Damien read it twice, which took him 15 minutes because he read the way he did everything. Completely, without rushing, not moving on until he was certain of what he was looking at. Then he signed it. Agent Reyes signed across from him. "Logan Mercer," Damien said as he capped the pen. "We'll have people at his home address within the hour." She collected the agreement copies. Holloway is already in a more complicated situation given that he's currently with the Marchetti people. That'll take a day, maybe 2, to extract cleanly. She looked at him. "Is there anything else I should know about his situation with them?" He went voluntarily. He thought he was buying protection. Damien set the pen on the table. He didn't understand that the Marchetti family doesn't buy people. They acquire assets, and assets don't get to renegotiate terms once the acquisition is complete. He stood up slowly, protecting the ribs. "He'll cooperate with you fully within 48 hours. He'll be grateful for the opportunity." He was right about that, as it turned out, though he wasn't present to see it. The drive back to Gloucester took just under 90 minutes at 2 in the morning with no traffic on the coastal highway, and a driver who understood that some silences were not comfortable silences, and still not silences to interrupt. Damien sat in the back with the window cracked an inch, the cold salt air coming in just enough to keep him present, and he watched the dark Massachusetts coastline move past and let himself be, for a few miles, simply a man in a car going somewhere rather than an organization in motion. His phone had 12 messages. 3 from Logan, sent at intervals across the evening, the first casual, the second with an edge developing, the third terse in a way that told him Logan had understood by then that something had shifted. 2 from Holloway's personal number, unanswered, 5 from various organizational contacts, the operational noise of a machine, beginning to sense that something was wrong without knowing what. One from Bates, from the hospital, which just said, "Call me when it's done." And one from Evelyn Parker's landline, sent at 11:20. "She's still here, she's sleeping. Don't knock when you come back." And he texted back, "Thank you." He didn't knock when he came back. Evelyn Parker had left the front door unlocked and a lamp on in the entryway. The quiet hospitality of someone who has decided to extend trust as a complete gesture rather than a partial one. The house was still and warm after the cold outside, and it smelled the same as it had 12 hours earlier. Old wood, coffee, salt, except that it had added to those smells something that he recognized after a moment as the particular domestic settledness of a place where someone has recently slept. He sat in the sitting room off the entryway in a wing chair that faced the dark window, and he let the exhaustion arrive. It came the way it always did after the adrenaline left, not gradually, but all at once, like a tide that has been held back suddenly released, and it went through him from the feet up and settled in his chest alongside the cracked rib and the cut above his eyebrow, which had reopened sometime during the drive and crusted over again. And he sat with all of it and didn't fight any of it. He was still in the chair when the first gray light came up over the harbor. He heard her on the stairs before he saw her. The particular sound of someone moving carefully in a quiet house, trying not to disturb. She came into the sitting room doorway in the gray sweater with her hair loose and her feet still bare despite the season, and she stopped when she saw him. She looked at him for a long moment. The light was very early and very flat, and it showed everything without mercy. His face, the cut, the exhaustion, the state of him generally. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." She came into the room and sat on the ottoman across from the wing chair and drew her knees up the way she had on the window seat 2 nights ago in the east wing, and she looked at him with the full, patient attention she had given him in her own kitchen 18 hours ago, except that something in it was different now. Slightly. The temperature of it. "Is it done?" she said. "The federal process started last night. Logan will be in custody by this morning. Holloway is already cooperating." He looked at his hands in his lap. "It'll take time to fully unwind, months on the legal side. The business restructuring will take longer." He paused. "But it's done. What needed to happen last night happened." She was quiet for a moment. "Were you hurt?" "Ribs. A cut." He looked up. "Nothing that changes anything." She accepted that. She had the particular quality this morning of someone who has slept and cried and thought and come to some arrangement with themselves. Not a resolution, not yet, but an arrangement. A provisional structure, like scaffolding, not the building itself, but the thing that makes building possible. "I called my sister last night," she said, "after you left. She wants me to come stay with her in Portland for a while." She looked at the window, the gray light on the harbor. "I'm going to go." He nodded. "Not because I've decided anything," she said, "because I need to be somewhere that isn't any of this. Your house, or my firm, or a stranger's sitting room at 2 in the morning. She looked back at him. "I need ordinary for a little while. I need to go to prenatal appointments and eat food that isn't whatever I can find in a crisis, and sleep in a bed that belongs to a situation I understand." "I know. You're not going to ask me not to go." "No." She looked at him carefully. "That's new." "A lot of things are new." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to manage this, Charlotte. I'm not going to send you somewhere comfortable and wait for you to come back on my timeline. I'm not going to handle your absence the way I handled everything else, like a logistical problem I need to solve." He paused. "I'm going to wait, and I'm going to do what I said I was going to do. And when you're ready to talk, I'll be wherever you need me to be." She looked at him for a long time. "You said that," she said slowly, "and I believe you mean it right now, this morning, in this room." She stopped. "I need you to still mean it in 4 months." "I know. Damien." She said his name the way she used to say it. Not the careful, slightly guarded version of the last year, but the original version, the one that had his full name in it and nothing withheld. "I spent 3 years watching you mean things and then have something more important come along, and I understand. I do. I understand what your life was, what the organization required. I'm not naive about what I married." She pressed her lips together. "But I need you to understand what that actually costs, what it cost me. Not as an abstraction, actually understand it." "Tell me," he said. She looked at him. What? Tell me. I'm asking. He held her gaze steadily. I've been asking you to be patient and to understand and to accommodate the life I built for 3 years. And I've never once asked you what it actually cost. So tell me. What followed was not a brief. It was not composed. It was the particular kind of conversation that only happens in the early gray hours when defenses are genuinely down and the stakes are genuinely clear. The kind of conversation that a marriage either has or doesn't have, and if it doesn't have it, it carries the absence of it forward like ballast until the weight becomes too much. She told him about the nights alone in the mansion that felt less like solitude and more like abandonment. About the dinner parties she hosted by herself while he was on calls that couldn't wait. About the pregnancy test she'd taken alone in the upstairs bathroom with the door locked even though she was the only person home. About the 2 weeks she'd spent trying to find a right moment to tell him, and understanding, gradually and then completely, that there was no right moment in his life because his life had no moments that belonged to her exclusively. He listened. He did not explain or contextualize or offer the counterargument he could feel the habit of him reaching for. He let her finish, and he sat with what she'd said. And he didn't perform the response. He just had it, the quiet, uncomfortable arrival of being truly seen doing something wrong and not being able to unknow it. I'm sorry, he said. Simple. No architecture around it. I'm sorry for all of it, including last night, especially last night. She was quiet for a moment. I know you are, she said. I know it when I look at you. She looked out the window at the harbor. That's the hardest part. Knowing you mean it and not knowing yet if meaning it is enough. Evelyn Parker appeared briefly in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee, assessed the room with the swift accuracy of a woman who has spent decades reading the condition of other people, and set the mugs on the side table and disappeared without a word. Damien thought, not for the first time, that there were people whose decency was a form of genius, and that he had spent 20 years surrounded almost exclusively by people whose intelligence operated in entirely other categories. He picked up one of the mugs, the heat of it against his palm, same as his own kitchen, same sensation, a small continuous thread of the ordinary running through the extraordinary wreckage of the last 48 hours. They sat together in the gray morning light for a while without talking, which was its own kind of language between people who have known each other long enough to have developed one. Charlotte left for Portland that afternoon. He put her in a car himself, not a town car from the organization's fleet, a regular car, hired through a regular service, and he stood on the harbor road outside Evelyn Parker's house and watched it pull away. And this time he knew where she was going and why. And this time the taillights disappearing around the corner meant something completely different from what they'd meant 2 nights ago in the rain. He shook Evelyn Parker's hand at the door. You called me, he said. You didn't have to. No, she agreed. I didn't. She looked at him with the direct, unhurried gaze that seemed to be simply her way of existing in conversation. She talked about you last night, after you left. He waited. She said you were the most capable person she'd ever known, and that you'd spent 20 years applying that capability to almost everything except the things that deserved it most. Evelyn paused. I thought you should know that's how she sees you, not the rest of it. That. He didn't say anything for a moment. Thank you, he said finally, for everything. Go home, she said. Fix what you can fix, and don't be the person who does the right thing once and then expects it to count forever. He drove back to Connecticut alone. The mansion was empty in a way that was different from its ordinary emptiness. The specific vacancy of a place that has had something removed from it that belonged there. The way a room feels after furniture has been taken out. The dimensions suddenly strange, the light falling in the wrong patterns. Marcus had a full security rotation in place, and the grounds were quiet, and the house was functioning normally in every mechanical sense, and it felt utterly unfamiliar. He went to his study. He took the envelope from his inside jacket pocket and set it on the desk. He looked at it for a while. Then he opened the center drawer and took out a small glass display case he'd had Marcus source and bring to the study while he was in Boston. Plain glass, simple, the kind of thing a watchmaker might use. Nothing that announced itself. He opened it and placed the pregnancy test inside, and the appointment card flat beside it, and he closed the case and set it on the corner of his desk where it would be visible from his chair, from the window, from the doorway. Not as a symbol, not as penance, as a fact, as the most important piece of intelligence he had ever failed to act on correctly, kept visible so that he never again had to remember it. Logan Mercer was arrested at 7:42 that morning outside his home in Westport. Damien knew because Marcus called him with the information in a tone of voice that tried to be neutral and wasn't quite. Logan had said nothing upon arrest according to the federal agents on scene, had simply looked at the cuffs and then at the ground, and had gotten in the federal vehicle with the specific quietness of a man who has understood that the hand has been played and lost, and that there is nothing left to say about it. Richard Holloway had begun his cooperation with federal investigators the previous evening, within hours of his arrival at the Marchetti property in Providence. His instinct for self-preservation being, as Damien had predicted, both robust and immediate. Anthony Marchetti himself was taken into federal custody 4 days later, along with 7 members of his organization and 2 of the elected officials whose names had been in the documents Damien had transferred in the federal conference room on the 4th floor of the Boston building. The unwinding of the organization took 14 months. It was not clean. Clean was not available as an option. There was no version of dismantling 20 years of layered criminal infrastructure that produced clean edges and tidy conclusions. There were lawyers and federal monitors and restructuring proceedings, and days when the legitimate business holdings that Damien was preserving seemed to exist under such weight of scrutiny that the weight itself might crush them. There were former associates who felt betrayed and said so in ways that required management. There were 3 lawsuits from parties who had worked with the organization's legitimate entities and were now uncertain about what they were actually working with. There was an extended period during which Damien Calloway existed in a condition that bore no resemblance to any condition he had previously occupied. Not powerful, not criminal, not civilian, not free, just a man working methodically through the consequences of the life he had built and trying to leave something on the other side of them that was worth inhabiting. He drove to Portland once a month, always with advance notice, never without her agreement, always leaving the same day. He took her to prenatal appointments when she asked him to, which was not immediately, but which became over the months more frequent. He sat in waiting rooms with the particular patience of a man who has learned that waiting in the right place matters more than moving in the wrong direction. He watched her body change and her face change, and the slow, incremental process of her learning to believe that the person showing up month after month was the actual person, and not the performance of a person, because she had seen enough performances to know the difference, and she was not going to be convinced by anything except duration and consistency, and the plain accumulation of days in which he was exactly who he said he was. He did not move to Portland. She did not ask him to, and he did not offer, because they were not there yet, and both of them understood where they actually were, which was somewhere earlier in the process, somewhere in the part that required patience and honesty and the willingness to let time do what only time could do. Their daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in late spring. He was in the room. She had asked him to be, which was the thing he would carry longest from that day. Not the birth itself, not the first sound of his daughter's voice in the world, not the specific, incomprehensible moment of looking at a new person and understanding that she had always in some sense been missing, but the fact of Charlotte asking him to be there. The phone call 3 days before, her voice even and clear, saying, "I'd like you to be there if you want to be." The word want, which contained multitudes. He held his daughter for the first time in a hospital room in Portland, Maine, on a Tuesday in May, with the window open and spring air coming in off the water, and Charlotte watching him from the bed with an expression that was tired and complicated and not without tenderness, the expression of a woman who has survived something and is still in the process of understanding what she survived and what she still wants now that she's on the other side of it. The baby was 7 pounds and 4 ounces and had Charlotte's eyes and his jaw, according to the nurse, though Damien couldn't see any of it clearly yet. She was just herself, a new specific person, with the gravity of someone who has no idea what they've arrived into, and therefore no anxiety about it, the perfect confidence of the newly born. He named her nothing. That was Charlotte's choice, and she chose it with him present, in the hospital room, the 2 of them sitting with the baby between them and a list Charlotte had made over several months. And they went through it together, and they landed on Eleanor, which was Charlotte's grandmother's name, and which suited her in a way that became more obvious the older she got. He drove back to Connecticut that night. He sat in his study with Eleanor's first photograph on his phone and the glass display case on the corner of his desk and the window open to the spring night air. and he thought about a rainstorm and a folder and a woman standing on the other side of a marriage telling him a truth he had chosen not to hear. He thought about a positive pregnancy test under a bed. He thought about a letter formation in a lowercase r that had been slightly too deliberate, and a shell company registered to a man who had believed the shadow of other people's names was permanent, and a 68-year-old retired nurse who had called a man she'd never met because some weights weren't meant to be carried alone. He thought about the specific cost of the kind of certainty he had practiced for 20 years. The cost to other people, paid in full, without any possibility of retroactive correction, only forward amendment. Charlotte came home 6 months later. Not to the mansion, not initially. She came to a house in New Haven that Damien had bought and sat empty for 3 months while the lawyers finished the final phase of the restructuring, a house that was a third the size of the estate and had an office with good north light that she could use for the architectural practice she was rebuilding, the one that was doing schools and libraries and a community waterfront project in Bridgeport, a project she'd been approached about by a city councilwoman who had seen one of her earlier designs and had, Charlotte said, no idea who her husband was and wouldn't have cared if she had. He moved to New Haven, not because she asked him to. She hadn't asked him to live there, had in fact been careful not to, because she was still the woman who understood that geography was not intimacy and proximity was not repair. He moved because it was where she was and where Eleanor was, and because the Connecticut estate had stopped being a home some time ago and had been for a long time simply a very large property that housed his certainty. And his certainty, it turned out, had been a very expensive and largely useless possession. On a rainy October evening, 8 months after Eleanor was born, he drove to the estate one last time for the formal closure proceedings, the signing of the transfer documents that would convert the property to a charitable foundation Charlotte had helped him design, a community development organization focused on affordable housing in 3 Connecticut counties. He stood in the driveway in the rain and looked at the facade of the house with the floodlights on and the iron gate behind him. And he thought about a woman walking out of this house with a single suitcase in the rain and the specific sound of a car door closing. He reached into his jacket pocket. He had taken the glass display case from his study the day before and removed from it the pregnancy test and the appointment card and put them back in the envelope because they didn't belong in that study anymore, didn't belong in this estate or in the architecture of the man who had lived here. He held the envelope in both hands in the rain for a moment, and then he put it back in his pocket. He drove to New Haven. Charlotte was in the kitchen when he came in, Eleanor on her hip, one hand managing the baby and the other turning the pages of a project brief spread across the kitchen table. The kitchen had north-facing windows and a tile floor she'd chosen herself, and it smelled of coffee and the particular lived-in warmth of a house that has a child in it, and it looked exactly like a place where a person might feel held rather than merely sheltered. She looked up when he came in and read his face the way she always read his face, all of it, every layer. "How was it?" she said. "Final." He set his keys on the counter. He looked at Eleanor, who regarded him with the calm, alert attention of a 7-month-old who has not yet learned to find anything alarming and finds almost everything interesting. "Hi," he said to his daughter. Eleanor blinked at him. He took the envelope from his jacket pocket and set it on the kitchen table beside Charlotte's project brief. She looked at it, then at him. "I thought that was in the display case," she said. "It was." He looked at the envelope on the table between them. "I think it belongs here now, not behind glass." He paused. "Just here." She was quiet for a moment, her hand moving in small circles on Eleanor's back the way it did automatically when she was thinking. Then she picked up the envelope and held it, the way he had held it many times. In hospital rooms and car back seats, and in the rain outside a house that used to belong to someone he used to be. "Okay," she said. "Just that." The same word she had said in the East Wing doorway 18 months ago, except that this one contained something entirely different. Not the resignation of a woman walking out of her marriage, but the provisional, careful, genuine acceptance of a woman deciding, one more time, to walk into something that might yet become what it was always supposed to be. She put the envelope in the kitchen drawer beside the one with the takeout menus and the spare batteries and the miscellaneous small items of a life being lived in real time. And she closed the drawer and she turned back to her project brief. And Eleanor reached for Damien's collar with the single-minded focus of a person who has identified an interesting object and sees no reason not to simply take it, and he let her. Outside, the rain came down on New Haven the way rain comes down on every coastal New England city in October, steadily, without drama, the kind of rain that intends to stay for a while and has made its peace with that. Inside, the coffee was still warm.